Some of you may have noticed in some shots this certificate I have hanging on my wall, and this is the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers, and that is the signature of Donald Trump. And I wanted to say a few things about how that came to be, some things that I feel about it, and if anything, I just hope this story is entertaining and maybe informative. So I grew up in Hilton, New York, which is a town about 25 miles northwest of downtown Rochester. And it's a type of town where if you drive in any direction, there are cornfields and soybeans. And Hilton itself is a town of 5,000 people, although there are a lot more people like that constitute the Hilton School District, which is kind of big. But anyway, it's a modestly conservative, mostly white town that leans Republican. And I would say that in the time that I was growing up in the 80s and 90s there, the country was a lot less geographically polarized politically than it is now. My first exposure to politics was because Rush Limbaugh was on the radio on 1180 WHAM, and I used to work in my dad's dry cleaner tailor shop for the wage of a penny a minute. And then eventually I graduated, or maybe it was a cost of living adjustment to $1 an hour, or maybe it's just because it rhymed. And that's how I was able to buy Super Nintendo in 1992. And during that, the 90s, I remember listening to a lot of conservative radio. I remember the time of the Clinton impeachment in 1998 and being kind of rooting for GOP figures like Lindsey Graham on C-SPAN because he was one of the House managers, and I was intrigued by politics in some sense. And I also, I don't know, just kind of growing up in that milieu, sort of identified with the sort of traditional conservatism, like belief in institutions and incremental change, and maybe like old style, like what I've heard of is now described as like Edmund Burke conservatism. And it was so much so that in our AP government class in senior year, I actually scored the teacher, Kim Saxton, actually arranged us in the class by political leanings, and I was scored the most politically conservative on the test, and I was placed in the far right corner. And it seems like somebody else's life now. And I don't know, it was all like arguing about politics as a high school student was kind of entertaining. I remember the internet that we had at that time was more like IRC chats, like internet relay chats. And I was probably what people would now consider to be like a troll, but I grew out of it pretty quickly. Whereas I think people like, I don't know, Stephen Miller really never grew out of it, that were kind of these firebrand conservative high school students, and just really went into doing that professionally. I decided to do something useful with my life and not become a professional political pundit, and went to school in STEM. So my first major was biomedical engineering, and when the second week of undergraduate at Boston University, 9/11 happened. So the Tuesday of my second week at BU was Tuesday, September 11th, and it kind of changed the trajectory of my political alignment really forever. So the disillusionment with kind of conservative politics began with the the misreaction to 9/11, namely through the Iraq War, and also my interest in science was also allowing me to get exposure to many science writers. So I remember this watershed book that I read by Alison Jolly called Lucy's Legacy in an anthropology course that I took, which was about human evolution and had a big conservationist undertone, and it had cited a lot of books by Edward O. Wilson, and it's E.O. Wilson, the late great Harvard biologist. And so I read his books on the future of life and biodiversity and sociobiology, and I got really into his work. I got into the early books of Richard Dawkins and Stephen Jay Gould, and then the environment and clean energy became a real moral axis for me. And I actually got this idea from E.O. Wilson that some people become scientists. One of the archetypes that budding scientists follow is the archetype of the struggle of good versus evil, that you're going to figure something out for the sake of good. And I thought, well, clean energy, that's where it's at, and the political left in America was much more aligned with environmental goals than the conservative end of the spectrum. So I didn't end up doing research in energy as an undergraduate. I joined a lab in organic and medicinal chemistry, and I enjoyed the work. I enjoyed the routine of it. I enjoyed, the setup, workup, column, NMR, structure determination kind of thing. I like sort of the chemical intuition that it built in your mind about how to put molecules together. You got exposed to a lot of different types of chemistry and reaction setups and separation processes and stuff. That was all very appealing to me. But I didn't really find my niche until I saw a talk by Nate Lewis at Caltech. The talk wasn't at Caltech. It was at the Beckman Scholars Symposium in Irvine, California. And he talked about ways of using organic materials to help contribute to the energy availability and use of energy. So when I went to grad school, I started working with Dr. Emily Weiss and Ryan Checky and Michael Dickey, who are great collaborators even today. And this intersection of organic materials and solar cells and later batteries and organic light emitting devices was the center of the bullseye and the center of intersecting interests of mine. So I was fully, committed to doing something in energy and sustainability engineering. And the particular piece of that puzzle that I built my tenure package on was the mechanical properties of organic semiconductors. So how are you going to make those materials more mechanically robust? So materials that are found in energy-related technologies, how do you make them more mechanically robust, flexible, and even stretchable? And then the stretchable electronic materials lent itself to implantable and wearable sensors, and that's what got me into health-related research ultimately. And so I was nominated for the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers, or the PECASE, twice that I know of. The first time was by the Air Force Office of Scientific Research, my program manager, Dr. Charles Lee, and I was in his organic materials chemistry program, and he nominated me my first year as an assistant professor at UC San Diego, and I was not selected. I don't think I made it out of the Air Force internal selection process. The second nomination came in 2014-2015 timeframe during my application to the NIH Director's New Innovator Award. And the applicants that were selected by NIH weren't involved in their selection process. So my program manager Rosemary Hunziker, I later found out 4 years later, nominated me. And then each year, a new cohort of awardees were awarded, and I wasn't among them. And I'm like, whatever. I didn't even know that I was being considered for it. So, I didn't think that much of it. And then sometime maybe in 2017, I got sort of a cryptic email from the White House Office of Science, Technology, and Policy about a background check. And I thought, oh, this could mean something interesting. I might get invited to DC for something. I have no idea. It could be consulting, grant review panel for some White House project. Who knows? So could be good, could be interesting. And so I filled that out. And then that was still during, oh, wait, no, it couldn't have been 2017 because I think it was still in Obama's term. But then I think on Obama's last day in office in 2017, they announced a cohort of PECASE awardees, and I wasn't on that list. And I think that was the only year of Obama awardees that didn't actually get to go to the White House. They actually mailed them their certificate, because I've seen pictures of some of my colleagues at UC San Diego who had their picture taken with President Obama, which I thought was pretty cool. And so then fast forward 2 years, we had our daughter in May of 2019. And then the first week of July of 2019, I was up early, TMI, but I was in the bathroom and I was checking my email. And one of my colleagues, Padmini Rangamani from UC San Diego, had sent me an email saying, congratulations for getting the PECASE. I'm like, what? I had no idea that this was way past any time that I thought that I was, eligible. Like, I had just submitted my package for full professor. I had already been tenured for 3 years. And so I opened up the White House press release, and sure enough, my name was on it. And then later that day, I got an email from the White House OSTP, and they said that the ceremony was going to happen in like 10 days from then, and to send, my travel plans and make my travel plans as soon as possible. And so this was 2019, so President Trump had been in office for more than 2 years at that point. And is that right? Yeah, 17, 18, part of 19. Yeah. So I had, in that short period of time, there was a lot of kind of chaos on email because some individuals wanted to do some kind of protest, like we're the new awardees. We don't like how the new administration, the Trump 1 administration was handling science. At that point, there weren't any cuts to federal research funding. There was a lot of talk and maybe not a lot of support, and maybe some even active ignorance of science, but nothing like during the current term. And I'm like, this seems a little overblown. I'm like, if you're really going to protest, then don't accept the award, right? And so this is like protesting and taking the award. To me, it sounded like we're going to go on strike, but we want to get paid. And so I'm like, you have no skin in the game if you're just protesting, but you also want the line on your CV. And so I, at the time, was just like, I didn't want to be a sheep about it. So I'm going to go there. I'm not going to rabble rouse or anything. And at the time, I didn't know if the president was going to be there. I also didn't know that it wasn't going to be at the White House. So in the past, when they had done the awarding of the PECASE award, it was in the East Room of the White House. So about 100 scientists got it per year. My year, they were giving it to 300 because they were behind and they needed to catch up on multiple years of nominees in a row. So they needed a bigger venue. They did it in the Daughters of the Revolution Constitution Hall in downtown Washington, D.C. And I didn't know who was going to be there, who the highest ranking federal official was going to be there, would be there. And in the past, it had actually been the president. And so in my taxi or my Uber ride or Lyft ride on the way to the airport the day that I went, my driver was a retired law enforcement officer, and he said, well, if it doesn't say if the president is going to be there, and he said that he had done security for a lot of high-profile events, he said, if it doesn't say who's going to be there, there is a good chance that he will actually be there because they tend not to publicize the public meeting events or meeting locations or appearances. If they can get away with not putting it, then they won't. And that made sense to me. Then on my way from the hotel to the venue, I was walking in Washington, D.C. and looking at all the cool historical and seat of government. It always kind of gives me a chill to be in Washington, D.C. For, although maybe the mystique is kind of wearing off now. But I had going through my head the opening music to House of Cards for whatever reason, because I guess they also show all of the historic buildings in that opening montage. But anyway, I got there and there was no security whatsoever. So I'm like, okay, the president is not going to be here. And I will cop to being pretty disappointed by that. Not that I was a supporter of the administration. Like, I didn't like a lot of the things that they were saying and doing about science, but at least they were keeping the money flowing to research, and we were still allowed to propose broader impacts in our NSF grants. And I was conflicted, but I thought, well, it would be the story of a lifetime if he were actually there. And then part of me thought, like, oh, my handshake is going to be really sweaty. That'll probably really torque him as a germaphobe, and that kind of entertaining, mischievous thought went through my head. And so, yeah, they had all of us in the hall. The highest ranking federal official who was there was Kelvin Drugemeyer, who was at the time the OSTP director. He was a well-regarded meteorologist who was regarded as pretty apolitical and actually quite well respected by the scientific establishment. The only protest that I really saw there was one colleague covered up the name like this, covered up the signature in the picture where he's shaking hands with Director Drugemeyer. And so when I got people ask me about the signature on the certificate. So what I can say for sure is that it's a real Sharpie signature, which is the president's signature tool is a black Sharpie. And if you take the certificate out of its case, it actually bleeds through the paper on the opposite sides of the on the opposite side of the paper, right at the dwell points. Now that could be a manual signature, but it could also happen with an auto pen. Did the president sign manually 314 of these certificates? I don't know. but let's just say that President Trump has not been shy about criticizing former President Biden's use of an auto pen tool, and it takes one to know one. So I'll just say that. And so when I first got this award, I was kind of like, I don't know if this is humble. Well, this whole video is humble brag, obviously, because I got this thing from the White House. But I was conflicted, like with this tremendously anti-science administration, and I have a signature of the president on the wall, but it's also an award from the White House, right? And so at one point when Biden won the election, I put a little piece of tape and wrote Joe Biden under the signature, or covered up the signature with Joe Biden's signature. So I'm like, well, I was actually nominated during the Obama administration, so maybe that I don't know, that was kind of a little subversive of me. At least it was a conversation starter. And then I took that off and left the signature as it is. And yes, I continue to be conflicted about it, but not really that much anymore. It is what it is. Now when I look at it, I kind of chuckle because I've since made it to Ted Cruz's list of doing like woke research and all that like bullshit. And some of my grants are under serious threat of being canceled. Some of them probably will be. And I don't think this job will ever really be the same again. And it's largely because of recent actions by those in charge. And so conflicted again, but not so terribly so that I'm like totally heartbroken about the conflict. So now it is what it is, and I hope that story was informative, maybe, and entertaining. Talk later. Bye.